combine has come and gone, and 28 prospects are on the list here for us to talk about as winners, or sure, let's call them losers, Dave. I guess that's just such a mean word, but the
Yeah.
NFL combine does matter when it comes to the NFL draft, and it doesn't necessarily make these players better or worse, but the NFL draft and draft capital will change ever so slightly because of this combine. So it's important to take notice of which players tested well and which players at certain positions historically need to test well. And we're going to get into that today. Dave, I want to start off right here with the winners. Omarion Hampton at the running back spot.
Ooh.
I think he secured himself a spot in round one.
I think so. Yeah. And if you look, Tony Pauline reported that a lot of teams have Omarion Hampton ahead of Ashton Ginty. And at first, it kind of surprised me. But then you think about it, like, Ginty, really good in college. He lit it up at Boise State, but he is a little bit undersized. I think Hampton does have that more NFL build. He weighed in at 220 pounds and crushed his athletic testing at that weight. So I am still pretty steadfast in my ranking of having Ashton Ginty ahead of Omarion Hampton, but I want to blame anybody for going Hampton over Ginty in rookie drafts this year.
I mean, I would blame people for going Hampton over Ginty, but I do think Omarion Hampton has secured himself as the number 2 running back in this draft class. That's where I had him. That's where I'm going to keep him. Coming in at 5'11", 221, 4.46, elite explosives. I think he's looking probably towards the end of round one. We could see him on a team like Pittsburgh, the Chargers, the Vikings. Those are all teams.
Oh my goodness.
It would be
He'd
absolutely
rush for
insane.
2,000 yards on that team. It would be beautiful.
It would be absolutely insane. Another guy who had himself a great combine at the running back position, Quinshon Judkins, running back out of Ohio State. Dave, he had the best relative athletic score in the running back class, 9.89. I got to say, I didn't see that on film, but my dude showed up. 5'11", 221, runs a 4.48, elite explosive numbers. I think he has secured himself a spot as a second round pick, and he's probably anywhere from that running back 3 to 4 ranking for most people now.
Yeah, I think it was really hard to evaluate Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson because they were so pigeonholed into their roles at Ohio State. I mean, Quinshon Judkins was the early down guy who was getting those touches, and Travion Henderson would come out when the defense had dropped back a little bit and he was able to get in space and do more in the receiving game. And I think because of that, it kind of diluted us into thinking that Quinshon Judkins was nothing but this kind of early down thumper. I've heard the term plotter thrown around. Well, that could be further from the truth. He looked great this weekend. So I think, when we talk about moving guys, I don't want to put too much weight into the combine. But I think what you do is you kind of move guys inside of tiers. And my tier 2 running backs were Quinshon Judkins, Omarion Hampton, Travion Henderson, and Kaleb Johnson. And Quinshon Judkins was at the bottom of that tier and is now starting to creep his way up.
Yeah, I have him in the exact same tier. I moved him from running back 5 to running back 4. So it's not a massive change, but I think what he did was he showed us, okay, he does have that speed where he can be an every down back, and you can rely on him to do more than just be a guy that's pounding the rock up the middle.
And same size as Omarion Hampton, too. He's got that prototypical 221 is that's big for a running back.
These guys, man, they're weighing in the absolute perfect running back sizes, 5'11", 221. Like, they're running 4.4s. This is just, it's specimen territory. Another guy, not quite exactly specimen territory, but I think he was a big winner from this, and it's RJ Harvey, a guy who we've all kind of had floating around in that very next tier of running backs. And for me, Dave, I'm looking at it, and RJ Harvey is now my running back 6 in my rankings. He came in a little bit small, but he's stocky, 5'8", 205. The feet are
double
fast.
Count. We knew he was going to be small. So, he came in expectedly small.
Right. And I think what you always look out for in the combine is, are these guys going to weigh more than what they did at the Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, or during their season? And how are they going to run with that? So at 205, he still had elite speed, elite explosives. I actually love the relative athletic score comp to Michael Bennett. That's a good pool from back in the day on the Minnesota Vikings. Yeah. And it's just, he's a speed for days guy at Dave. I really like RJ Harvey.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of RJ Harvey. I've got him as my running back 7 in this class right now. Very, very high on him. There's one issue sometimes. He has this penchant for trying to bounce balls outside and hit the home runs, which he did very frequently. He was
Yeah.
second in breakaway runs behind only Ashton Ginty last year. I'd like to see him at the next level, trust himself a little bit more through traffic. He's got really good footwork. He's good when he's running between the tackles. He just still likes to bounce it out a little bit, kind of that DeAndre Swift type of play style a little bit. But man, the measurables, the athleticism, it's there. So if RJ Harvey lands on a team that can utilize his skill set in the best way possible, the ceiling for him is just so, so, so high, especially now as we see the NFL is starting to kind of value speed over size a little bit more.
And he's still sort of learning the running back position. He came
Yeah.
into college as a quarterback. So at 5'8", though, you're not playing quarterback anywhere in college. Just saying that. Now, the name that everyone is going to be talking about, and he's going to be a winner on every single list, Bayshul Tuten. And I actually went on a show with our guys over at Player Profiler, and Bayshul Tuten was being talked about as a guy that was going to light up the combine. And I was like, well, he does have some good speed. Did not exactly expect this. A 4.32 elite speed and explosiveness for Bayshul Tuten. And when I started to dig a little bit more, track background, sprinter background,
Yeah.
whole family is a family of sprinters. What you do see though, Dave, and I wanna take the good with the bad, right? Is go back to the film. Let's see what we see on film. Everything in his film is straight line speed. Everything is just finding that one cut and go, which I mean that still has its value in the NFL. Where he struggled was in the agility drills, the change of
Yeah.
direction, and that's where he struggled. 5'9", 206. He's got the speed, and I think that's what a lot of people are going to look at. I think this moves him up a little bit. I think he's potentially now a round 4 or 5 guy as opposed to being a round 6 or 7 guy.
I mean, he might have been an undrafted guy before the
Yeah.
combine. Like now he's at least on draft boards for a lot of people. And I think that given the right scheme fit, things could work out for him. We know that straight line speed works out so well in that West Coast kind of Shanahanian offense. So if he does land in San Francisco or Miami where they could utilize that speed, it could really work out well. But yeah, you talk about it, the agility just wasn't there. I mean, he was first among all running backs in his 40-yard dash. He was first in the 10-yard split. He was first in the vertical. But as you alluded to, dead last in the shuttle. And we don't really like to see that for running back. So moving him up, but this feels very Isaac Garendo-esque from last year. A guy that wasn't
Mm.
on a lot of people's radar. We knew he was a good athlete, showed out at the combine. And usually those athletic measurables or alone are enough to get drafted. So wouldn't be surprised at all to see him go day 3 this year.
Just put him on the Niners at this point. Let's just do that,
Makes too
right?
much sense. It really
Let's
does.
just
Yeah.
let's just make
Yeah.
it happen.
I mean, Miami makes a lot of sense too. Raheem
Yep.
Mostert, is old and a free agent. Jalen Wright, they drafted him last year, didn't really seem to find his footing. So if they're looking to add depth and a high upside depth piece, Tootin makes so much more sense for Miami.
Last running back on here, DJ Giddens, running back from Kansas State, and he ended up with a 9.78 relative athletic score. This is top 5 amongst running backs. Ran a
Yeah.
4.43. Very similar play style to Bayshul Tuten, where he's got the straight line speed, but not a really good change of direction guy. The explosives on here were surprising because he's such a patient runner that you don't always see that on film. But there's still something missing from the film, Dave. I don't see a guy who's always finding the right running lanes. I don't always see a guy that's able to make defenders miss.
I
What
think
are
the
your
big
thoughts here on
thing
DJ
is that
Giddens?
I think the big thing that misses from that I don't see in his film is the ability to play through contact. I mean, this guy
Yeah.
just goes over so easily, and that's going to be an issue. We know he's fast. He's another guy, like you said, much like Bayshul Tuten. You put him in the right spot where they can get him out in space and let him rip off big plays, whether in the screen game or in some outside zone runs. It's possible that he can pan out, but he really needs just the perfect landing spot, I think, to really be a fantasy relevant guy.
Yeah, I still think he's one of those guys, just a day 3 player that's going to get thrown into a mix. I don't know that this vaulted him up into day 2 type stuff here. All right, Dave. We were going to say that was the last running back, but I know you have one
Yeah,
more
you
guy
you
you want to talk
you,
about.
you got to let me just mention
I
Tahj
Yeah.
Brooks here. I still think the age and the mileage from college, it's going to make him a day 3 guy. But what I saw when I like Tahj Brooks, what I like about him so much is his ability to run through traffic and make defenders miss in tight spaces. And he had an elite agility composite score, crushed his 3-cone and his shuttle drill. And we've seen, I haven't done this myself, but Tej Seth with Sumer Sports, he has done. Um, studies to see what drills translate most to NFL production. And as much as we love the 40 time, the reality is it isn't that important for running backs. Three cone and shuttle are, and Tahj Brooks checked off both of those with elite scores. So still probably going to get pushed down draft boards a little bit because of his age, but a guy that I'm really, really going to be in on with a good landing spot.
And I'm not. So I'm just going to leave it at that because this is the positive side of the episode. Let's move on to the wide receiver position because Matthew Golden from Texas, he's been a guy that has just been rising and rising and rising over the last few months. I mean, from an incredible finish to the end of the season to going to the combine and being basically the only guy from Texas not saying that he was going to break the 40 time record and then going out there and running a damn good 40. So Dave, Matthew Golden, I think he has secured his status as a round one wide receiver. I think there was some people maybe teetering there on the brink, and I was one of them. But I think he now sits in that tier with Luther Burden, Emeka Egbuka. I think he's going somewhere in there, unless Tet McMillan just has an absolutely disastrous pro day, which I don't know that could happen. I mean, anything could happen in the draft process, but Matthew Golden, surefire first rounder, it seems like now.
It seems like, yeah. And, we talked so much about how this was like a weak receiver class, but I think it just keeps getting a little bit better the more information we get about these guys. I mean, we're going to talk about more risers, but a lot of the guys who are rising are guys that we already like, that we kind of had in that wide receiver 6, wide receiver 7, wide receiver 8 range. And then they come out and they have really good combine performances. I think we're going to see probably 8 or 9 wide receivers off the board before the end of round 2. And that isn't something that we were thinking a month ago.
Yeah, I'm still going to say this is from the analytical side. The production profile for Golden still worries me a little bit. I will say, like, the tape is good. Don't get me wrong, the tape is good. I'm not seeing the great that some people are seeing. He's kind of good at everything, not great at anything. But hey, Matthew Golden could end up being a top 20 pick in the NFL draft, and draft capital is going to speak volumes for a player like that. Let's take a look at his teammate, Isaiah Bond, wide receiver from Texas, who I think in the world of PR and social media, he was an absolute loser this weekend. And Isaiah Bond, I'm sorry, dude. Like, you can't say that you're going to go run a 4.1, which would just be insane, and then run a 4.39. Like, it's just not, you can't do that. And I guess we love it. We love it when a wide receiver has a bunch of confidence, Dave.
Yeah.
I will say this.
Personally, I like the Matthew Golden style of not saying a word and then going out there and crushing it. I think that's way more impressive than going out and yapping and looking like a fool. Poor guy got booed too after his 40. I've never seen that before.
They were booing a lot of people out of the combine.
Yeah.
It's kind of nuts. I will say this. One thing that came out very positive from Isaiah Bond here, and this is why you do the whole testing, is to find play speed. And he did end up having the fastest miles per hour on the field while going through the drills on the GPS at 24 miles per hour, which we've discussed this before about how much that matters. It kind of feels like it matters more for players when they're a little more likable, and everyone sort of seems to be really down on Isaiah Bond after this. He's not necessarily a winner from this week because we knew he was fast. For me, he just kind of stays exactly where he was as a likely top 75 pick in the NFL draft, and maybe a team falls in love with him. But Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, the Texas wide receivers, I think they've really solidified themselves as top picks in the NFL draft. Let's go to another set of... Yeah. Let's go to another set of teammates here. Iowa State, Jaylin Noel and Jayden Higgens. Now, I want to start with Noel first because this is another fast guy, Dave, on the smaller side, 5'10", 194. It makes his numbers all that more impressive because to get a good relative athletic score, you kind of have to overcome being a little bit smaller. And I will say this, not even the speed and the explosiveness, the agility and all that stuff, because I knew he was fast. This is the guy that I told you on film. I had to double check that it wasn't sped up as I was watching. He went out and hit 23 reps in the bench press. That's the most
crazy.
Most of any wide receiver, more than Elijah Arroyo and Harold Fannin at the tight end position.
That's insane.
This is insane. And to me, what this says is that you can let him go and play slot wide receiver, and you're not worried about him getting bullied off the line of scrimmage by anyone, really. This is a guy that you're not worried about his size, because that typically tends to be the thing with guys that are sub 200 pounds, 5'10". Jaylin Noel, I think, becomes a day 2 pick pretty easily right now.
Yeah, I don't like throwing the comp around often because it is a very lofty comp. But when I watch Jaylin Noel, I see so much of Golden Tate, even the swagger that he plays with. Like, he is just violent after the catch. Like, he's one of those little guys that just loves contact, like loves running through defenders when he has the opportunity. He's fast. He's elusive. really big fan of both of these guys out of Iowa State, Jaylin Noel and Jayden Higgens, and it just makes me wonder, how did Rocco Beck not throw for like 5,000 yards last year, having these two guys who both look like pro-ready NFL receivers right now?
I mean, I feel like that question can be asked with so many of the quarterbacks, and you just start to look at like who the receivers are, and you're like, dude, what were you doing? What was
Yeah.
going on? But you
Jaylin
mentioned
Noel,
Jayden
though, he's a
Higgins.
guy who moved up big
Yep.
time. Looking at my rankings right now, he has cracked my top 10. I've got him inside my top 10 receivers pretty confidently. I mean, he is just such a fun guy to watch.
Yeah, he was already at wide receiver 10 for me. He's now up at wide receiver 9. So I've got him in that same spot, Jaylin Noel and Isaiah Bond as wide receivers 9 and 10 in my rookie rankings right now. But let's talk about his teammate, Jayden Higgens from Iowa State. And this is a guy who a lot of us have referred to him as sort of like another Drake London
Mhm.
comp. The speed here was really impressive. 9.85 relative athletic score, fourth highest amongst the wide receivers. Dave, the explosives showed off the whole basketball background, his ability to do the broad jump, the vertical, everything. What we didn't see was the agility drills. And what's funny is almost everyone that didn't run the 40, we kind of figured they didn't have great long speed. And then everyone who didn't do the agility drills, we said, we kind of figure they don't have great change of direction. And that's my only negative that I've had with Jayden Higgens is that the change of direction is not great. I actually loved the relative athletic score comp for him in, by the way, just throw it here, relative athletic score,
Kent
Kent
Lee
Lee
Platt
Platt,
is amazing.
Math
Yeah.
Bomb. Just incredible work. If you're not following him on X, I can't believe I called it that, but yes, X, follow him at Math Bomb. Excellent stuff here from the NFL Combine. But his comp was Hakeem Butler. And it's listen. In hindsight, it seems bad, but Hakeem
Mhm.
Butler was a nice prospect coming out. I think
Yeah.
Jayden Higgins is another guy that has secured round 2 draft capital.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Jayden Higgins, and I'm not going to knock him for sitting out the agility testing. I mean, this guy, 6'4", 220, like he is a big dude. Agility is not,
It's not gonna be his thing.
his strong suit. Yeah, I mean, he is very good at the nuances of playing receiver. Using his hands to help him get that little bit of extra separation. He's a very fluid athlete, but it doesn't really show up with the quick feet and the agility the way that we'd like to see. So I don't blame him for sitting out those drills, but yeah, definitely we saw the speed there, and I think there were some concerns about his long speed, and he was able to answer those this week. So Jayden Higgins, another guy moving up. I've got him as my wide receiver 7.
Yeah, let me see. Where do I have Higgins? I have Higgins as my wide receiver 8. But honestly, wide receivers, just like running back, I think a wide receiver 6 through essentially 10 for me is all very interchangeable.
Yeah.
One of those guys who is actually my wide receiver 11, just outside of that tier, Elic Ayomanor, wide receiver from Stanford, who I dare I say he was looking svelte at the combine. He looked very trimmed, very different from what I saw on tape. I felt like he came in at 6'1", 208 pounds. I would assume that's not his playing weight. I feel like Io
Yeah.
Manor is probably a little bit closer to like 215, 218. I remember saw a lot of measurements. People having him at 6'2", 6'3". So he's a little bit shorter, a little bit lighter, but he ran well. And that was the big thing for him. He surprised me with the speed testing, getting that 4.4 on record. He had elite explosives in the vert and broad. This makes me have to go back to the film and see, okay, when and where do these athletic traits come into play? Because he's another guy that for me, no agility drills. That was my biggest question mark on him, was his ability to be able to turn on a dime when he's running these routes. He's good with spatial awareness, and to me, that's a big deal. But I want to go back and take a look at the film again and see, where do these athletic traits come up? For me, Dave, round 3 feels like his spot in the NFL draft.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I was surprised by the athleticism as well because I think you and I talked off air when we were kind of digging into the wide receivers, and we both said, "Hey, look, Ayomanor, the production's there and the big plays are there, but it looked like there was just a little bit of athleticism lacking." So it's good when we have the combine and we can take some of those question marks that we have and get answers to them. And Ayomanor, he answered those questions in the right way. We now know that he's a little bit more athletic than what we saw on film.
I think the biggest test of how far he has risen up draft boards will be who can pronounce his name by the time we get to the NFL draft. Because once we all figure out the pronunciation of his name, we're going to have it. You and I both saying two different things, but we mean the same player.
Yeah.
Next one on here, a little bit easier to pronounce. Tory Horton, wide receiver from Colorado State. Dave, you and I, when we talked about Tory Horton, we both liked him a lot. I just
Mhm.
kept saying he's a long strider. He looks so smooth, almost looks like he's jogging all the time. I think a lot of that has to do with the routes that he was asked to run over at Colorado State. But wow, looked a lot faster than his film,
Yeah.
runs the 4.4. He's 6'2", 196 pounds. He wasn't really used as a deep threat at Colorado State or as a field stretcher all that much, but I think he could be potentially doing that. Get him in an offense with a quarterback that can actually pass the ball. This is another guy, no agility numbers, but I moved him up from wide receiver 15 to wide receiver 13. He's getting close to that range for me. I think he could sneak into the third round, but I've got him kind of firmly in round 4.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much in lockstep there. I've got him as wide receiver 12, and I was surprised by the speed as well because he typically was that kind of underneath across the middle guy. What
Mm-hmm.
I liked so much about Tory Horton was his route running and his hands and his catch radius and all of these things that I didn't expect to translate well to the combine. I thought he'd be one of those kind of unathletic guys that would fly under the radar that might be able to, find himself in a fantasy relevant role, but coming out here and crushing the combine the way that he did, he's going to be moving up draft boards. I think round 3, round 4 is probably kind of that sweet spot for him, but he is just a very polished, fluid athlete. Big fan of him and was happy to see him show out this week.
Robert Woods is a guy that comes to mind when you think of Tory Horton. It's just another one of those receivers, just like really solid at everything they do.
Yeah.
Really, really solid. All right, let's get to the tight ends here because we've got 2 winners. The first one, Terrance Ferguson, tight end from Oregon. 9.81 relative athletic score. And Dave, the reason that tight ends and their performance at the combine matters so much is because we want to see a tight end get above an 8.5 relative athletic score. Typically, you want to make sure, and the higher the better. Obviously, you typically want to see them in the 9s if you can. So Terrance Ferguson with a
And it
9.81.
does, as far as positions go, relative athletic score
It
has the
matters a lot
strongest
for tight ends.
correlation to tight ends than any other position. And that's why, we saw the last time we saw a guy who had off the charts athleticism fall out of round 2 was George Kittle. And I think since then people said we're not making this mistake again. So these tight ends that are very, very athletic, they just get pushed up draft boards now because nobody wants to miss out on the next George Kittle.
And guys you don't even think about. Like Sam Laporta doesn't really jump off the screen as a super hyper athletic guy. Relative
Mhm.
athletic score was great. Relative
Yep.
athletic score was great for him. And Terrance Ferguson is another one of these guys who, I mean, he ran a 4.63, first among the tight
Crazy.
ends. I mean, best vertical and best
Uh-huh.
10-yard split amongst the tight ends. So you've got a guy who is very explosive, has the long speed. Everything I've seen on film shows an ability to get open, ability to run after the catch, good body control through tough catches. I mean, he's a dude. He is a dude. And Dave, I moved him up right now. For me, he's my tight end 5. I moved him ahead of Harold Fannin and a couple of other guys on this list here. But Terrance Ferguson, I think, is a major riser. I think he could end up being a round 3 guy in the NFL draft.
See, I think he could end up going round 1. I think he is
Whoa.
that good.
Okay.
I mean, I think so.
Okay.
Looking at the tight ends, I see it. I think the top 5 guys are very, very safe. When you look at Tyler Warren, Terrance Ferguson, Colson Loveland, Mason Taylor, Harold Fannin, we didn't see them all work out at the combine, but I think 2 of them have already secured round 1 draft capital, and I think
Mhm.
others may have as well. I love Terrance Ferguson. I've got him ahead of Colson Loveland. He's my tight end too. When I watched
Wow.
him, the way that he played, I think he lacks a little bit as a blocker, but that doesn't really matter all that much for fantasy. I mean, we want guys that are out there primarily playing receiver. Over 50% of his snaps in college came out of the slot. Out of the slot. But the number with Terrance Ferguson that gets me most excited, he averaged 9 yards after the catch per reception. I mean, every time this guy caught the ball, he was immediately turning upfield and ripping off big chunk plays. And that's what you want to see from these tight ends is the ability to generate yards after the catch. So he was my tight end 3 coming into the combine. He's my tight end 2 now. I'm a huge fan of Terrance Ferguson. And, like I said, all of these guys, Warren, Ferguson, Loveland, Taylor, and Fannin, wouldn't surprise me if all of them end up going round 1.
Stand on business, Dave. Proud of you. Proud of you. Plant your flag, buddy. Uh, Next guy on here, Luke Lachey, tight end out of Iowa. Just feels like every year we got an Iowa tight end here, and the
Why
relative
not keep
athletic
going back
score.
to the well? It's been
I
a
mean,
nice hit rate so far.
the RAS score is not bad, man.
Uh-huh.
8.69, 6'5", 251 pounds. You've got the size that you want. You've got a guy that can both block and be a good receiver. Great explosive metrics in the vert and broad. Okay agility in the shuttle and 3-cone, but I don't think we ever really expected that. And the relative athletic score right now is missing the 40-yard dash. I assume he's going to run that at his pro day. And typically the players that run at their pro day, they end up having good times. So we're going to see something good for him. My comp for Luke Lachey remains Jake Ferguson. I think he's a
Yeah.
guy who's just sort of good at everything. He's not going to blow you away with the athleticism, but he can be a productive NFL tight end. And I think that's just how a lot of teams are going to look at him, especially coming out of Iowa, man. It's just a good pedigree. It's a good tight end factory.
Yeah, we don't want a helmet scout, but you
We
look at the
are.
history of Iowa tight ends, and it's pretty dang good. With Luke Lachey too, it was so hard to get an eval on him because 2022 is when he kind of started to break out and look like a good player, and then 2023 he came out in the first 2 weeks of the 2023 season. He was kind of the primary weapon for the Iowa offense, and then had a season-ending ankle injury. Came back in 2024 and never really looked like himself. The per game production dropped off quite a bit from the previous year. And now I think him showing up to the combine, with that ankle injury now almost a year and a half behind him, he's finally healthy. The athleticism is clearly there. We already talk about, the Iowa, they've just been a tight end factory. Luke Lachey was a guy early on when I started scouting. I was very, very high on him. I had him inside my top 5. As I dug deeper into the class and got familiar with Arroyo and Fannin and some of these other guys, I've moved them up. But still, Luke Lachey, I've got him as my tight end 7 in a very deep and top heavy class. It wouldn't surprise me if he's another day 2 guy.
Yeah, Luke Lachey, tight end 7 for me. I think I'm seeing him probably round 3. Yeah, going by these rankings, I'd say he's probably a round 3 or round 4 guy. But yeah, another guy who got the opportunity he's going to be productive in the NFL. Just needs to be on a good team. And honestly, he doesn't even need to be on a good team. He fits every team. Let's just be
Yeah.
real. These Iowa tight ends, they fit anywhere. Last guy on here as a winner, and it's from the quarterback spot. Tyler Shough, quarterback out of Louisville. This was a guy that I really had my eye on for a minute. And I sort of let myself be strong armed into, okay, I don't want to keep evaluating quarterbacks because every year it's such a crapshoot. All the
Yeah.
big names and all the hype has been around Jackson Dart. And every time I'd watch the film, I'd be like, I don't see a guy that should be a first rounder, like some are saying. Who I really liked was Tyler Shough. And I'm like, well, that's probably a little too crazy to say that. And full transparency, everybody. Starting to see more people come out and say that Tyler Shough is a top 3 quarterback in this draft class has given me the confidence to say that that's where I'm going to put him. He's my quarterback 3 in this class. 6'5", 224 pounds, ran a 4.6. He's got the strong arm. There's not really anything from a physical standpoint or from a tape standpoint where you just say, not good enough. The biggest questions for him have been age, which is no longer a bugaboo at the quarterback spot. And yeah, I'm bringing back the word bugaboo. Joey Wright, you're welcome. And injuries. Now the injuries matter, Dave. The injuries that he's had: broken collarbone twice and broken fibula. The way I'm
Mhm.
looking at this, these are not soft tissue injuries. They're not likely to be recurrent injuries. They feel more random, especially when it comes to breaking bones like this.
Yeah. I mean, he the college production's been there. I mean, this guy, I believe he was a 7-year guy. I mean, he's been around for a while, and I
When
think
when
that
I told you that my comp for him was Justin Herbert, and you're like, why? Because he used to be Justin Herbert's backup. I
he
was like,
was.
oh damn, you're
That's how
right.
long. That's how long this guy has been around college. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's been there for a minute, but I think that's one of those things. Who was it? Was it Brandon Whedon was the guy who was drafted at like 28, 29 years old and
Yeah, he's
just
about
a
46.
monumental bust? Yeah, and since then, I think everybody's been scared off by age. But look back
Bo
last
Nix
year,
made it sexy again to be old.
exactly. Yeah, so I think that had Tyler Shough, is that what we're? Because I've been saying Tyler Shough.
Shough.
Is it Tyler Shough?
Shough.
Shough. All right, all
Shough.
right. And we got Jeff Bell saying Tyler So yesterday, so we're all over
Oh,
the place on the pronunciation for Tyler Shough. I think had he been in last year's draft class, he probably would have fallen late into day 3. But I think that Bo Nix alone is reason that somebody's going to go out and get him early in the draft this year. And by early, I mean probably day 2.
yeah. Yeah. I think he's probably a day 2 guy. I mean, this whole talk of, we do this every year. We're like, oh, there could be another quarterback that sneaks in around 1. Last year, it finally happened where they didn't just sneak in around 1. Everyone snuck into the top 15. It was nuts.
Yeah.
All right. We've gone through our winners here. Let's go through the quote unquote losers of the NFL combine here. And not all these guys are true, losers or losing value or dropping in the ranks, Dave, but Kaleb Johnson, running back out of Iowa, is going to be a name that a lot of people talk about here. He ran a 4.58, not super impressive, but I wouldn't say that it was all that unexpected. Had he weighed in less and been like 215 or 210 and still run that time, yeah, I'd be a little more disappointed. For me, all this did was move him back behind Quinshon Judkins. And
That's
what I
it. Yeah.
noticed here, looking at his splits, the initial 10 splits were slow, which he's not a super explosive guy out of the blocks, but he gains speed as he goes. He's a downhill runner, and this is exactly what I saw in film with Kaleb Johnson.
Yeah, there's nothing really too surprising here, and like I feel like even saying that Kaleb Johnson is a loser or a faller or anything like that, it's unfair because he came out and he did pretty well. I mean, yeah, the 4.58 was the fourth slowest of the class, but when you adjust for size, he was middle of the pack with size adjusted speed score. The reason he's a faller has so much more to do with how good Omarion Hampton and Travion
Right.
Henderson and Quinshon Judkins and all the
At the
other
same
guys
size.
in his tier looked. Yeah. So again, I wrote an article on Sunday morning, kind of talking about how much I let the combine bleed into my analysis, and I said that's what you should do. Is you should use it to kind of move guys inside of tiers. So we're not saying that Kaleb Johnson ran a 4.58. He's a day three guy now. All of a sudden, that's not what we're saying at all. I mean, he's still young breakout age, good college production. He's got all of the other boxes that we want to see. But when Judkins and Omarion Hampton and these other guys come out and crush the combine, we got to move them up ahead of Kaleb Johnson.
I still think Johnson's a second round pick in the
Oh
NFL
yeah,
draft.
yeah, yeah.
The
Somebody's
way
going to take a chance on that size and production, and he's still very young too. So there's still a lot to like about Kaleb Johnson.
And I mean, I don't really think you're even taking all that much of a chance. Like, all these guys are very safe running back prospects. It's just, what do you value more? Do you want the big bruiser? Do you want the guy who's a little more explosive, like a Travion Henderson? It's what are
I
you
want the
going for
Travion
here?
Henderson.
Of course you do. I know you do. Same. All right, next one on here. Woody Marks.
Yeah,
This was not great. This was not great. 5'10", 205 pounds. Same exact 40 and 10-yard split as Kaleb Johnson,
at half the
who
size.
yeah, half the size. Dave, your math is way off, but 20 pounds less than Kaleb Johnson. So to not have the explosives, to not have the long speed, and honestly, this was something I kind of felt I always saw on film. Woody Marks, I'm looking at my rankings right now. He was already at running back 15 for me. He dropped from running back 15, or excuse me, running back 14 to RB 16 in
That's
my
exactly where I've
rankings.
got him. Yeah.
It's just okay. Like, to me, this was more of the same. I think it's for the people who maybe had him a little bit higher due to the analytical profile and the receiving. You're gonna have to go back and check. Like, was he creating big plays? How often was the lack of speed getting him caught from behind? Stuff like that.
Yeah, so that stinks. Not crazy to see him come out and not have a great day. I will say with Woody Marks, he still has probably the best receiving profile of this class. So there is still an out to a fantasy relevant role if he is just kind of used primarily as a pass catcher. But yeah, there's no way to really spin it other than he had a uh, pretty terrible weekend in Indy, and that's going to knock him down. So I know that was one of the players that you and I disagreed on a little bit, where I was a lot higher on Woody Marks than you were, and the more I dug into it, I started to bump him down a little bit. Now after the combine, you and I are exactly in lockstep. I've got him at RB 16 as well.
Next guy on here, Devin Neal, who is a player that I kind of said that he was more of just like the de facto RB6 for me at the time
Yeah,
because he really couldn't figure out who to put where. And Dave, what this did, it wasn't a particularly bad combine. He ran a 4.58, which is okay. What I don't like is that he weighed in smaller than he did at the Senior Bowl, where he was 220 at the bowl and now 213 at the combine, still ran a 4.58. So what I want to know is what's going to be his real playing weight. Is it going to be 220? And we're talking about a player that runs a 4.6. Is it supposed to be more like the 215, 210? I keep going back to his interview where he comps himself to Alvin Kamara. And you and I have both seen this where he's not really the guy that's running over players despite his big size. He's got decent explosive numbers, but Devin Neal is a guy that I feel like doesn't quite know his own identity. And I don't think that we got any clarity from the NFL Combine either. He's just another one of these guys that's kind of like good at everything, but not great at anything. And that's why I have other guys ahead of him, like Cam Scattaboo and LaQuint Allen, guys that I think
yeah.
have true identities as running backs.
Are you at RJ Harvey over Devin Neal yet, or am I
Yes.
alone on that island?
No,
Yeah.
I have RJ Harvey ahead of him.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too, and it's weird. I really like the top 7 running backs in this class, and then I feel like there is this kind of clump of running backs, Ollie Gordon, Devin Neal, Damian Martinez, that I'm not totally sold on yet, but I think they've got enough that they're going to end up going, probably round 3, and I've got to pay attention to that, looking at how I expect the draft to shake out. But yeah, Devin Neal, he's one of those guys that kind of does everything okay, but doesn't do anything exceptionally well. He's one of those guys right now, at RB8 is where I have him. And, it just kind of feels like a placeholder there. Like you need to put somebody in at RB8. But when I'm in rookie drafts and I get to that section where Devin Neal is kind of creeping up as a guy who's about to get drafted, there's quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends that I find myself typically liking more than Devin Neal.
Yeah, it's a shame because that's what you really want is you want for especially at running back is you either need to be a guy that can handle a load for all 3 downs and show some elite athleticism, or you can fit into a role for a team. And when you don't really have that identity, it's a little worrisome. And at least with this next guy, who was a loser at the combine, so to speak, Ollie Gordon II, running back out of Oklahoma State, he weighed in 6 foot 226, which is exactly what we expected. A big guy, ran a 4.61. Just ever so slightly slower than Devin Neal, but he did this at 6 foot 226, a much different size, Dave.
Yeah.
Not great in the explosives. Not great in the explosives. Ollie Gordon just, I don't know, man. He seems like a shell of his former self and what we saw 2 years ago in film.
And now, I'm different when it comes to rookie analysis. I know a lot of people are playing Devy, where they're scouting these guys out of high school, and I think that's why Ollie Gordon's ranking is kind of propped up where it is right now. Because correct me if I'm wrong, it was 2022 or 2023. He had a really really good season,
Yep.
but I start, anytime I'm watching these players, I start with the most recent season. I was watching Ollie Gordon last year, Oklahoma State, and I'm just like, I don't really see it. I see a lot of other people are higher on him, and I don't really get it. I think this is one of those where the Devy campus to Canton community, whatever, like these guys that are drafting them as soon as they come into college, they've held on to their takes for Ollie Gordon for a while. I don't really see it with him. I have just steadily been moving him further and further down my rankings. I mean, I love the size. The size is great, but the poor athleticism with that size could leave him relegated to a role that isn't too great in the NFL.
Yeah, he's my running back 14 in rookie
Whoa.
rankings right now.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, I feel a little
not great.
justified, but I even moved him lower.
Yeah, not great. Not great. Another guy who it's weird to say that I expected him to have a bad combine, which was kind of baked into his ranking for me. Jordan James, the running back out of
Yeah.
Oregon. And it's because of the size, Dave. Like he's not a very big guy, but then he also didn't run very well. And this, to me, everyone, including myself, kind of kept making the comp of Bucky Irving, his former teammate at Oregon, and then Kyron Williams, and how similar he is to those guys. And those are guys that also did not test well. This is not me jumping to the conclusion that Jordan James automatically becomes one of those guys. Just give him the opportunity. I think he's a good running back, Dave. I think what you have said is that he shies away from contact. I find that just to be a good self-aware thing. You're not big. Don't take a lot of hits. But like you've stated, it might not be great in an NFL locker room, and the testing, I think, just drops his draft capital quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's okay if you're small and athletic, and it's okay if you're big and unathletic, but if you're small and unathletic, that is oftentimes a death knell for running backs, and that's what we saw with Jordan James. So a fun player. It was kind of weird, man. Something Jordan James and Tez Johnson were both the guys that everybody was really excited about the potential athleticism, and they both kind of face planted at the combine. And then Terrance Ferguson out of Oregon went out there and absolutely lit it up. So kind of the opposite, I think, of what a lot of people expected from some of these Oregon skill players. But Jordan James was a guy I wasn't really too crazy about. I've moved him down quite a bit at this point. Down at RB19, which means I'm probably not taking him in many drafts.
Golly jeepers. Yeah, I've got him at a running back 11 still. I don't love Jordan James, but it's kind of very similar to that earlier tier. I feel like once you get to like running backs 11 through 15, 16, they're all just sort of the same. But yeah, I mean, we have to pay attention to the combine. It'll move guys up and down, but I don't want to make it change me too much. I expected him to run.
To be fair, he was like my RB 14 or 15 before the combine. I mean, I just wasn't really a big fan. So moving him down to the bottom of that tier, there was already a tier that I wasn't too crazy about.
Yeah, fair enough. Another guy who kind of expected him to run poorly, but it was really, really bad. And I think the bottom has fallen out for Kyle Monangai, the running back out of Rutgers, who such fun film to watch. So much fun. He reminds me so much of another Rutgers running back, Isaiah Pacheco. I think that Monangai's dropped from like a 5th rounder to maybe 7th or undrafted. And
undrafted would be my guess.
It's one of the worst relative athletic scores that we've seen at the running back spot in quite a class, time. Worse than this class. Like it's just not good. I don't know that I ever saw any spectacular speed or athletic skills on tape, but he's a guy. He very much runs like the high school running back that knows he can deliver a beating to everyone else in the field. But I don't know if that's going to work at his size and his lack of speed in the NFL.
Yeah, it won't. I made the mini Debo Samuel comp because he plays like Debo, where he loves
Yeah.
contact and he runs through people. And you can do that when you're at Rutgers. You can't do that when you're 5'8" in the NFL. So yeah, I think he probably ends up going undrafted, which is a bummer because, like you said, the tape was so much fun. But yeah, I mean, the relative athletic score, their database goes back to 1987, and we know like athletes just keep getting more and more and more and more athletic. So even when you see a guy that's like a 70th percentile athlete in today's world, dating back to 1970 or 1987, like 70 percentile is not good because you're being compared to guys from the 80s and 90s who didn't have that same athleticism. Dating back to 1987, Kaleb Monangai is down below the 50th percentile mark, which is just terrible. So, yeah, Monangai is probably off a lot of draft boards after this weekend.
Yeah, he's my running back 20 right now. It's he fell about 4 spots for me. Monangai. Not great. All right, we got a few more on here. A wide receiver, Tez Johnson. I know you mentioned him earlier, wide receiver out of Oregon. Weighed in kind of what we expected, 5'10", 154. I think we were all hoping he'd come in at maybe 165
Yeah.
and run faster. That's the thing, is if you're going to be 154 pounds, you need to be running a 4.3. You need to be running a low 4.4. Even at worst, Tank Dell weighed more and ran a 4.49. Tez Johnson comes in and runs a 4.51, Dave. Now, I know it is 2/100ths of a second different between these guys. I mean, I know you weren't as high on Tez Johnson. To me, the explosives, well, not to me, but the explosives objectively were still very good. The
Oh, he
agility,
crushed the 3-cone. Yeah.
the agility was still elite. Going back to the film, and I'm gonna have to see. Like, was he just not winning deep ever? I mean, he's a return man. The speed is there. Why is it not showing up when you get into the 40-yard dash here?
Yeah, I don't know if it's just like a form, a technique thing. Like clearly has the speed, but yeah, it's disappointing. And I think a lot of people point to Tank Dell. That's been the comp, and they're like, "Well, Tank
Right.
Dell, he was small and he was unathletic, and look at how he panned out." Well, Tez Johnson is smaller and he's more unathletic. And Tank Dell, for as good as he is when he's on the field, has had back-to-back seasons with season-ending injuries, showing that maybe his size is tough to translate to the NFL. So Tez Johnson was one of those guys I wasn't too crazy about coming into the combine and have just moved him further and further and further down. I don't know where you've got him, Alfredo. He's my wide receiver 21. I mean, there are a lot of guys that I would prefer over Tez Johnson. I just don't see that profile translating to NFL success.
Once again, golly jeepers, I've got him at wide receiver 14. So we'll
Yeah.
we'll meet somewhere in the middle in the consensus rankings of the Football Guys Rookie Guide. You like that, Dave? That's a transition. That's called salesmanship.
We'll see. I
Uh,
mean, I could be wrong again. I do defer to draft capital. So if a
yeah,
team still likes what they see from Tez Johnson and says, "Hey, we're going to draft him in round 3 and hope for the best," I'll move Tez Johnson up. But right now, I just that size, that testing, that has me
yeah.
concerned.
I think best case scenario, he's a round 4 guy in the NFL draft.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what I end up seeing, round 4, round 5 for Tez. Okay, a couple of guys here that ran particularly slow, both running 4.62 in the 40-yard dash. First one is Ricky White, the wide receiver out of UNLV, who had himself a good bowl week over at the Shrine Bowl, but then just not a great combine here. If you run a 4.6 at 184 pounds, very similar to Tez Johnson, you can't be slow and small. And at this point, it kind of makes you undraftable. There's not many outlier players, Dave, running a slower than a 4.6 that are making it in the NFL. I assume he's going to improve on that time in his pro day, but Ricky White was a guy like I was flirting with in that like wide receiver 16 to 18 range. And I think he's going to be firmly outside of my top 20 after this.
Yeah, I've got him at wide receiver 19 and could probably move him down even from there. He was a player when I first started watching him, really, really liked him. And then the more I
Yeah.
watched him, the less I liked him. And I think Jeff Bell said it well. He's like, what he's doing at UNLV just isn't going to translate to the NFL. And so much of his production came on these like short little passes across the middle of the field where he could just turn upfield and rip off these big chunk plays. And that works in college. That doesn't typically work in the NFL. So you see a guy who's undersized, unathletic, with a role in college that doesn't really work in the NFL. A lot of red flags here on Ricky White.
The other guy is Pat Bryant, wide receiver out of Illinois,
It's a
and I
bummer.
wrote the scouting report for him in the Football Guys Rookie Guide. And I'll be honest, like I didn't see it when I did the initial scouting report, and I started hearing more people saying like, "Oh, he could be a day 2 guy." Pat Bryant, big downfield threat, big contested catch winner, and that is true. He is a good contested catch guy. He does catch a lot of his balls downfield. In his 40, he ran the 4.62. He picked up speed in that final 20 yards of his run, so you can tell he's a guy that he needs time to build up that speed. I just don't know that a player like this is getting that opportunity to just consistently be the deep threat guy and have a quarterback that's going to have a lot of time to make these throws always. So you need to be able to win in other ways. And winning, contested catches at Illinois is not the same as winning contested catches in the NFL. So that's going to be my big thing for Pat Bryant. I think he's probably like around 5 or 6 guy at best. I think it's probably closer to around 6 or 7.
Yeah, I think he was a developmental guy that people are going to take a shot on with the athleticism. But if the athleticism isn't showing up the combine, yeah, I'm with you on Pat White. I moved him way down as well. He was a guy who's kind of
Pat White.
or
Pat good Bryant. Freudian slip.
I've dropped Pat Bryant down to wide receiver 29. Can't really get much lower than that.
Yeah. Pat White also not in our top 20 wide receivers either. Just wanted to clarify.
But man, one of the best teams to play on NCAA. I can't remember what year that was, but
maybe
that
with
team
Tavon Austin,
Steve Slayton out of the backfield as well. That was a fun team.
Yes. Yeah. Oh man, that was a time to be alive. All right, we got 3 more players here. Will Howard, quarterback at Ohio State. Testing wasn't particularly great. All he did was the vertical and broad. He had the worst out of all the quarterbacks, but there was only 4. So like, there's not really much to go on here, but I think the big thing that was noticed was his struggle in the passing drills and just missing open guys. And, I think very, very cool of him. Shedeur Sanders came to Will Howard's aid on Twitter and was just like, hey, you guys need to ease off him. It's hard to get the ball to different wide receivers. Everyone runs their routes differently.
Guys you have no chemistry with either. It is tough. And I don't know if you've seen the spin control already happening where they're saying that the receivers when running for Will Howard kept running the wrong routes. Is what they're saying.
Okay. Well, because what I was going to say is like, yeah, Shedeur's right in that it's hard to get chemistry with brand new wide receivers. But when every other quarterback is doing it a lot better, right in the direct comparison, it's a struggle. And I don't know that Will Howard was ever really going to be the quarterback 3 in this class, but any potential of that happening is pretty much gone. And Dave, he's still around my quarterback 5 or 6 in this class. I think there's some good athleticism. There's some good tools. There's, obviously the way he was able to win towards the end at Ohio State, but
QB 9 for me. I mean, I wasn't crazy about. He's a winner, which is cool. Like we like that. That translates to the NFL sometimes.
So is Riley Leonard.
Yeah, but I mean, after this weekend, I moved Brady Cook ahead of.
Okay.
Will Howard.
Okay, you're disgusting. You're
best RAS of the class.
Okay, sure. Yeah, go put on the Luther Burden film.
Oh, I know. I'm well aware. I mean, Brady Cook.
Watch him play.
Yeah, but I mean, like you could say, Will Howard, Riley Leonard, Brady Cook. All of these guys did a good job winning games in tough conferences, but yeah, I don't think any of them are really exciting prospects by any means. I think we're trying really hard to like force other fantasy relevant quarterbacks. Yeah, like Jackson Dart or Quinn Ewers, or maybe it's Tyler Shough. I really think it's Cam Ward is the guy that has potential to be a difference maker. Shedeur Sanders in the right system could be good, maybe, and that's probably it.
Yeah. Yeah,
don't get Will Levis by Jackson Dart out here and expect him to go top 5. Yeah, I think we only
going to happen.
I think we only see 2 quarterbacks go in round 1.
A lot of people are going to get Will Levis in this NFL draft. I'm telling you, it's going to happen. Final 2 guys. We're talking about some tight ends here, and the first one is Harold Fannin, tight end out of Bowling Green. Dave, he came in at 6'3", 241. And what's weird is that all the measurements from Senior Bowl and Shrine Bowl almost seem to be different than what was being done at the NFL Combine.
Yeah, everyone's shorter at the Combine and has bigger hands somehow.
It's the weirdest thing. Everyone's shorter. The weight I know fluctuates, but the height and the hands, like, what the hell's going on?
Some people were measuring like a full inch shorter. Who I forget. There was some tight end who his hands literally grew an inch. Like his hands from the Senior Bowl till today grew an inch. How is that even possible?
Same thing with Jalen Milroe, quarterback out of Alabama.
That's who I was thinking of. Yeah, Milroe. Yeah.
I mean, what the hell's going on? I don't understand. But Harold Fannin, he gained 10 pounds since the Senior Bowl. So I have to imagine this is not his playing weight. I think that he's going to the combine. This is your interview. You want to look good in front of these teams. You want to show that you're weighing 241. And I think he bet on himself being able to carry that weight and still run well. And he ran okay. It was very average speed, average explosives. I think most people are obviously going to realize 241's not your normal playing weight. He's a guy that for me on film, I always saw him as kind of like a very weird mover on his runs after catch. He's got these tight hips. He's sort of like a waddler when he runs. He's heels hitting the ground first almost always. Like you see him get caught from behind. Granted, still incredible production against tough opponents.
Yards. I mean,
Yeah,
despite
like,
all that, just
none of
crushed.
that is debatable. Absolutely none of that is debatable. For me, all this did, I already had him at tight end 5, which I know to some people is sacrilegious, but I've got him at tight end 6 now behind Terrance Ferguson.
Yeah, I've got him at tight end 5. Like we said, athleticism translates well. And this is one of those, like, you don't want to overreact, but you do have to react somewhat. And I still think that he has potential to go round one. Like, people are going to see that production profile and they're going to get allured by it. I mean, for me, Tyler Warren's my clear tight end 1, but
Yes.
Terrance Ferguson, Colson Loveland, Mason Taylor, Harold Fannin, they are all so tight for me. We didn't even talk about Mason Taylor as a winner, but I think we probably should have. Mason Taylor looked phenomenal. I mean, the way that he moves, he looks like a 5'10" slot receiver in a 6'5", 260-pound frame. I mean, he looked great this weekend. He was another big winner for me, but I think
I need you to
Fannin,
put some respect on Elijah Arroyo's name, by the way. You keep not including him in your top 5.
he's my tight end 6.
He's my tight end 3. You
I-
need to include him. He's
all
getting
right,
first
all
round
right.
buzz, my guy.
He's going to be close. Yeah, he's in that tier as well. I should have included him in that tier as well. But Harold Fannin, it's tough. Like, I don't think that he had a terrible combine by any
He didn't.
means, but when everybody else comes out and does better, it's a lot like the Kaleb Johnson thing. Like, Kaleb Johnson didn't have a terrible combine, but his peers around him in that tier did better. Harold Fannin didn't have a terrible combine, but all of his peers that were in that same tier outperformed him. So if we're going to move them up, we have to unfortunately move him down.
Last guy on here. This is a very weird one. Gunnar Helm, the tight end out of Texas, ended up with a 4.49 relative athletic score. Dave sprained his ankle on his
Like
false
Mike
start in the
Ditka-esque.
40.
I think that's where, like some dude from the 1960s. That's the relative athletic score they'd have put up.
I mean, this is just, it's such a weird thing because you don't even know how to evaluate this because he just kept doing all the drills, which, I mean, I guess it's, you can choose how you want to look at it through rose-colored glasses. I love the toughness of this guy, but at the same time, you're like, dude, what are you doing? You're ruining all of your testing scores here by running and doing drills and routes and sled work on a bum ankle. Like just rest up, get ready for your pro day. After you tweak it, just walk out. Like that's it. You got to be smarter about this. And so Gunnar Helm was a guy that I already had at tight end 6. I've dropped him to tight end 8. He's behind Luke Lachey for me. And just the idea of the relative athletic score being lower made me go back to the film. And while he's smooth, he's got the spatial awareness, all that stuff, he is going to be very much a catch it and fall kind of tight end who's probably going to be a tight end 2 on an offense.
I think Gunnar Helm is like the most interesting storyline out of this week because you can point to the relative athletic score in the testing and say, yeah, he was unathletic, but you're not telling me. You don't think there's a handful of GMs out there that saw him play
Oh,
through that sprained ankle and
loved
are
it.
just like, yeah, he
Yes.
rubbed some dirt on it. He went out there. He's a football
This is
guy.
analytics. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that he might have actually gotten some brownie points for playing through that ankle. And you saw, Ian Rappaport tweeting out pictures of his swollen black and blue ankle the next morning. I don't think that it was the smart decision for him to make, but I think that there are a handful of NFL teams that are actually going to like it. So I don't really know what to do with Gunnar Helm in my rankings right now. I've got him at tight end 10, and I think that's just kind of a placeholder. We need to get more information from his pro day to see how his athleticism translates.
Right.
But I looked at this yesterday. His pro day is March 18th. It's coming up really soon. Like, that was not a minor sprain on his ankle, that amount of swelling, that amount of bruising. There's a chance that he still isn't 100% when it comes to his pro day in less than 3 weeks. So really interesting scenario, and this could heavily impact his draft stock. I got to be honest, though, I don't really know what to do with him in rankings right now.
I've still got him at tight end 8. By the way, was that rap sheet calling you on the phone as you were right after you mentioned him, man? Your phone blowing up.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. I just luckily got the Apple Watch here to ignore that one and deal with it after the show.
But
Shame on me for not going on Do Not Disturb. This is
you're
my
fine.
first
You're
show
fine.
ever.
Just, some professionalism, please. But Helm, listen, if a team drafts him and where they draft him, I think it's just going to be all based on film and what they want out of a second tight end. Nobody's drafting him to be their main tight end. And what you're doing is you're saying, I love the film on this kid. He's going to be reliable. We want to run multiple tight end sets. This is going to be a tight end heavy team. Not saying they would do it because they've already got the personnel, but a team like a Baltimore Ravens that knows that they want to roll out there with multiple tight ends all the time.
Yeah, I think this is a fun tight end class because of the depth here. There are some guys that could potentially break out, but everybody talks about the depth in the class. But I really think what's most exciting about it is the top end talent here. And I will throw Elijah Arroyo in there. I mean, it's
there
just,
you go.
he's a good player. Luke Lachey is another good player. Rondé Gatson, Joshua Simon really showed out as another big winner here. It wouldn't surprise me if we end up like out of this draft getting 10 tight ends that are going to be fantasy relevant at some point in their career. There are just a lot of good players at that position coming in.
Shout out to Rondé Gatson Sr., former Miami Dolphins wide receiver. What's up?
Yeah.
Fins up.
Yeah. And I think his son was smart to make the switch from wide receiver to tight end because he was kind of that tweener guy, too big for wide receiver. And they kind of said, once you get drafted, they're going to make you a tight end. So let's just get ahead of it now and make you a tight end. Now he's got a couple of years experience under his belt before coming to the NFL.
Yeah. Well, Dave, we did it, man. We went through nearly 30 players here after the NFL Combine, guys that are moving up and down our rankings. And we're going to be adjusting this and adding to version 2 of the Football Guys Rookie Guide, which you guys can find over at footballguys.com/rookie guide. And we'll also have the link for you down below in the description of this show. And version 2 coming out very, very soon. We're going to be back again next week. Dave and I, we got more draft stuff coming up, more NFL free agency stuff coming up. So many cool things here throughout the offseason. But as always, I want to thank you all for watching and listening all the way through. For myself, for Dave, we'll see you next time. Adios.